as soon as we get Warren in here. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Baltimore City Council. My name is Jim Kraft. I'm the chairman of the Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee. I represent the 1st District. To my immediate left is Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District. He is the sponsor, primary sponsor of both of the resolutions we're hearing this evening. And to his left is Councilman Bob Curran from the 3rd District, a member of the committee. To my right is Ms. Marguerite Murray, staff to the committee, and we're joined also this evening by Ms. Angela Gibson, representing the mayor of the city of Baltimore, Stephanie Rawlings Blake. Ladies and gentlemen, a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Number one, this happens to be a night, and we are being, first, we are being broadcast this evening on TV 25. So if you have any electronic devices on you, phones, I don't know, TVs, whatever, that are going to go off, please put them on silent. If you need to talk to someone, please go outside so that it doesn't interfere with the folks that are making their presentations. This evening, we happen to have a lot of things going on around the city. There are 4 members of this committee, besides myself. Councilman Curran is here from the 3rd District. He's going to be here for a little while. He has another meeting. We'll be joined in a little while by Councilman Branch from the 13th District. He has another meeting. The vice chair of the committee is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, and Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th District is on the committee. This evening, Councilwoman Clark is leading a march in her district in Waverly along Greenmount Avenue for public safety with Commissioner Davis and leaders of the police, the neighborhood churches, everyone else on public safety over there in response to a number of incidents that have occurred in the neighborhood. That march is actually going to go in Councilwoman Clark's district over to Councilman Henry's district. So both of them are out there. In fact, that march started 5 minutes ago at 5 o'clock. So they're going to be out in that this evening, so they won't be joining us. Ms. Stephanie Murdoch is here representing Councilwoman Clark from her office. We're also joined by Paul Plymouth, representing the President of the Baltimore City Council, Bernard Jack Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I did see Deputy Mayor Andy Smulyan around here in the back here. The Mayor, Stephanie Rawlings Blake's Legislative Director. Okay, so that's one other thing. Generally, we vote on a resolution at the end of having conducted the hearing. And on resolutions, the whole purpose of the vote is to confirm the fact that we have had the hearing. Because of the unique circumstances of this evening, and that is we were having people move in and out, when Councilman Branch comes, we will have a quorum of the committee. So at that point, whenever that is, I'm going to break for just a second, and I'm going to conduct that vote so we can confirm that the hearing has occurred, and then we'll move on, because I don't think we're going to have a quorum by the end because of people moving out for the commitments that I described a couple of minutes ago. So I'm going to describe what we're going to do, and then I'm going to turn this over to Councilman Costello for some opening remarks. Because I'm calling for hearing at this time City Council Resolution 160301R, and this is a resolution that was introduced on April 18th, 2016, co-sponsored by initial sponsor Councilman Costello, and then co-sponsored by the council president and council members Kraft, Stokes, Clark, Henry, Branch, Scott, Curran, Spector, Middleton, Mosby, Holton, Welsh, and Reisinger. And this is an investigative hearing expediting stormwater management projects and activities for the purpose of calling on the Department of Public Works and Finance to take steps to expedite stormwater management projects funded by the Stormwater Enterprise Fund and otherwise, and to send representatives to report to the City Council on how these funds can be most effectively, quickly, and efficiently used to promote improved water quality and healthier neighborhoods. Calling for hearing Council Resolution 160302R, and this is a resolution that was introduced on April 18th, 2016, sponsored by Councilman Costello and co-sponsored by the same council members. And this is for an informational hearing on the Stormwater Enterprise Fund usage. And this is for the purpose of calling on the Departments of Public Works and Finance to report on the collection, use, and planned use of Stormwater Enterprise Fund fees and the volume and value of participation credits and mitigation variances accepted to date. These bills were both referred to the Department of Public Works and Department of Finance for reports, and I'm going to defer right now to Councilman Costello for his opening comments, and then we'll go to the agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councilman Kraft pretty much summed it up, but basically we wanted to call DPW in to report on the collection and the use and planned use of these fees, basically so that taxpayers have a better understanding of what their money is being spent on and have some level of confidence that it will be spent on something useful moving forward. And of course, the second part has to do with expediting these projects. We've been collecting this fee for some time now, and I think it is important that the city makes sure that it's doing everything to move forward and spend this money, because the reality is that this fee is not going away, and we need to demonstrate that we've done something useful with this money moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. We're joined by Councilman Warren Branch from 13th District. Okay, so I'm going to do what I said that I was going to do a minute ago. So, Ms. Murray, if I can have those. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
So, give me 1 second, Councilman. Okay, so 160301.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman.
First of all, I want to thank the sponsor for bringing this to our attention. I know we have a lot of information to receive tonight, and I've received the packets, and I will be going through that, but I want to perform a little housekeeping duties while we have a quorum. I'm going to move City Council Resolution 16-0301R favorably from the Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilman Curran, seconded by Councilman Branch, to move Resolution 0301 favorably. Councilman Kraft votes yes. Councilwoman Clark is excused. Councilman Curran?
Yes.
Councilman Henry is excused. Councilman Branch?
Yes.
Okay, 3 votes in the affirmative, no negatives, 2 excused, no abstentions. This bill will go to second reader on Monday, June the 13th.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also proud to be a co-sponsor of the following resolution, and I'm going to ask that I move for a favorable report from the Judiciary and Legislative Investigation Committee for City Council Resolution 16-0302R. Favorable.
Seconded, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. So we have a motion from Councilman Curran, seconded by Councilman Branch, to report this out favorably. Councilman Kraft votes yes. Councilwoman Clark is excused. Councilman Curran?
Yes.
Councilman Henry is excused. Councilman Branch?
Yes.
3 votes in the affirmative, no negative, 2 excused, no abstention. This bill also will go to second reader on Monday, June the 13th.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I assume there will be no amendments to the resolutions. Is that correct?
There are none.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilman Branch, before you came in, I did explain to the people here and to the people watching on TV that both you and Councilman Curran had other meetings and other obligations this evening, so that you would be here for a while, but I know that you did have to leave for other things, and that's why we conducted the vote earlier.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so one other thing before we do this, I want to thank Councilman Costello for introducing these resolutions, and I want to thank our partners from the Department of Finance and particularly from the Department of Public Works for all of the hard work that they've done on this. Ladies and gentlemen, back in 2008, former Councilman Cole and I introduced a resolution, and Ms. Collins was from DPW was very much involved in this. And at that point, the informational hearing was on trash in the harbor. And for approximately 2.5 years, almost 3 years, we conducted a series of meetings and hearings and all that ended up resulted in the Healthy Harbor program and the creation of the Healthy Harbor program. And out of that, we also worked on the stormwater program and all, but this is something that we've been working on going on 8 to 10 years now. So, you know, we're very proud at how far we've come in this. We have great partners here in the environmental community. We're going to hear from them in a little while. And you know, we worked very diligently with DPW, with our, as I say, our partners in the environmental community and folks in the neighborhoods in developing this stormwater program. So, so we're very interested in hearing what they have to say. Now, this bill was referred to 2 agencies, and one of them was the Department of Finance. So let me just check on finance. We have the first resolution went to finance, and let me flip it.
Mr. Chairman, before you begin,
Yes, sir.
do you think before the end of our term, since yourself and myself and others are won't be here at this time next year in this capacity, do you think we'll be able to take a swim in the harbor in your district sometime before? Because I worked at the, as you know, I worked at the Sugar House for 16 years from 1980 to 96, and the harbor, the boats that came in for the sugar boats and all and everything else, I worked in, not on the boats, but I worked quite closely with those that unloaded the boats, and then obviously saw a lot of the activities in the water. Actually, I saw when the Allied site burned down years ago. I was right across from the harbor from that and watched that from about 100 yards across the water. But do you think we'll be able to swim in the harbor anytime?
Well, Councilman, if you go down to the Canton Waterfront Park on really hot days, you will see people swimming off of the Canton Waterfront Park.
Well, good.
And if you go down to Fort Armstead, which many of you are familiar with, which is probably the southernmost part of the city.
City, yes.
If you looked at the Healthy Harbor report, that was one of the areas where the fecal content is at a level where it is constantly swimmable. But
Oh, good.
so the water is swimmable down there, but as I understand it, the current is pretty swift. So if you go swim off Fort Armstead, make sure that you are well anchored.
Well, I can
because,
remember if
you'll
just,
end up either somewhere down the bay or further.
I can remember there was a day when I was down at work at the sugar plant, and there was a real strong wind blowing in from the west. I don't know if folks remember that, where the sea level of the harbor went down several feet, and you can actually almost see, obviously, the near bottom there. Obviously, you couldn't quite see it because of the murkiness of the water, but I remember when the water level in the harbor, inner harbor, was about 4 to 6 feet lower than what it was on a normal tide, or high tide or low tide. So I've got quite a lot of memories of the harbor, and I'm proud that you represented that area over the years. I know you tried your best to make the harbor as accessible and as clean as it can be in your turn there in the city council. I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate it. Okay, so we have from On 302, we have our 301 referral report. Finance will be on hand to respond to any questions. And on 302, we actually have some numbers from Finance. And I think what we'll do is hold off on those once we hear the presentation from DPW, and then we'll do any questions. So, Ms. Collins, Ms. Groves, who's gonna, Ms. Collins, you're gonna start? Okay. Okay, thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Councilman Costello. Marcia Collins, representing the Department of Public Works. I'm going to keep my comments brief because Kim Grove, who is here with us today, is going to give the PowerPoint presentation. And in speaking with both you and the lead sponsor, we were given permission to put the PowerPoint together for both resolutions so we wouldn't have to do individual presentations. We appreciate that fact. We warn everyone that it's chock full of information. We have printed copies available at the knee wall at the back. And so we encourage you to pick them up. We have a glossary of terms, which I find important both for environmental terms and for financial terms. A copy of the slideshow and of the new report that we were required to do by the state legislature called a financial assurance plan that we wanted to take the opportunity to speak to here as well. I thank this committee for all the work that they do. I am constantly before the Judiciary Committee, and I will say that I would say in my career, the effort we did for 1+1 and the effort we did for the stormwater fee were two of the most taxing, difficult, long, exhausting processes, but they were good processes. And I know that a lot of the people who are here today in the audience were part of those processes. And so it is fitting that we're back here today to help answer some of the questions that are embodied in the two resolutions. So I thank the committee for all of this incredible hard work. And I'd like to introduce now Kim Grove, who's going to give the presentation. We're going to try and move it along crisply so that you can have the opportunity to ask questions and that the audience can have questions.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Ms.
welcome.
Collins, what we'll do is the council members will hold our questions until the presentation's completed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kim Grove, and I am with the Department of Public Works. So as Marcia explained, this presentation will cover both hearings. And there were several bullet items for both of the resolutions. So what we did was we developed an agenda that you can see right here that takes care of those bullet items. In addition to addressing those bullet items, we are using this hearing to introduce the financial assurance plan, which is a required report for MDE. Is that a little bit better? Okay. I do want to point out that the information that we're presenting tonight is not a lot of new information. This information is already shown in several other resources that are available to the public. We have the plans that are in our laws. We have our watershed implementation plans that we issued in 2014, and then amended it in August of 2015. Those are available online on the Clean Water Baltimore website. We also want to say that a lot of the information can be pulled from the annual budgets as well as the reports that we have to send to MDE. So it was almost 3 years ago that we were in here looking at the ordinance that was going to create the stormwater fee, and as just an update of what happened during those times, we had presented a three-tiered structure with another part of the structure based on impervious area. We also had initially requested that it would be $18 per ERU, but what we finally came to work with was a $15 per ERU per quarter rate, as well as several legislative fee reductions, in addition to certain specific credits being listed. Another thing to point out is that the the legislation that was finally passed had set the rate constant for 4 years. And this is just a reminder of the final rate structure, and that we do have the residential rates not just set as a regular fee, but also as a ratio of that ERU, which is an equivalent residential unit. So here comes the buckets. The stormwater fee does help support stormwater operations, street sweeping operation, and the capital improvement programs 520 and 525 that are related to the stormwater program. But those aren't the only revenue sources. We also have the general fund, we have grants, we have the water and wastewater utility. We also receive miscellaneous fees related to permit review fees and penalties and fines related to the enforcement of Article 7, Divisions 2 and 3. And for those of you who really enjoy the budgets and the operations budget, this is another way to look at it. This is fiscal year 16 operations, and I know that the council is currently looking at fiscal year 17 budget proposal, so I'm just showing you what the fiscal year 16 is. Mostly it's focused on program 674, but there's also a portion in 661, activity 14, which is related to street sweeping. The slide also shows that we have those additional funds. On an average, you'll see $2.5 million from the general fund, and then another $3.2 million from the water and wastewater utilities, because those activities do have functions that are related to water and wastewater. So in total, we see about almost $5.7 million to support those operations from revenue sources other than the stormwater fee. So the MS4 permit, we're actually in our 4th cycle of the permit. They have been going on since the 1990s, even before you had your initial discussions. The permit itself is a rather large document, and there are a lot of different conditions, but the restoration plan requirement of 20% impervious surface restoration is a main driver for a lot of these costs. Also, we have TMDL compliance. TMDL is total maximum daily load. A lot of the focus and the driver for the impervious surface restoration is related to nutrient and sediment TMDLs. These pollutants on their own may seem like it's okay. Nutrient sounds great, but in too much of a high concentration, they can result in some really heavy algae blooms and some fish kills, which makes the harbor very unswimmable. So what we have is really 3 sets here. You've got the Bay TMDL, and at a state level, that is the driver for the 20% impervious surface restoration. And then the city themselves have 7 local TMDLs related to nutrients and sediments, and that really gets a little bit more site-specific. We're also expecting that once Phase 2 is done in 2017, that there'll be another Phase 3. So don't expect that this permit is the only end run. There's still a lot of work to be done. In addition to those TMDLs, we also have TMDLs related to chlordane, bacteria, PCBs, and trash. The trash TMDL was just issued a couple years ago, and we submitted our implementation plan to MDE earlier this January of this year. So in August of 2015, we issued an amended watershed implementation plan that really focused on the 20% impervious surface restoration. It included projects, programs, and partnerships. Everyone talks about P3, this is my other, and we're just gonna call this 3 Ps instead. And with that, if you wanted to think of it in a budgetary way, your projects are a lot of your capital improvement projects, and they're now estimated about $88 million will be spent by fiscal year 19. For the programs, those are your operations, and the main functions for those will be inlet cleaning as well as street sweeping. And then there's some operations that may have an indirect effect, and those are our partnerships, which also include the development that may occur within the city. For some perspective, the stormwater program was historically funded by general fund and some water and wastewater utilities. And if you were to go back a slide, you'll notice that the operations for the increased street sweeping and the inlet cleaning were about $11 million just for those two. The total operations that used to be for the stormwater program were just $11 million. So we've definitely, there was a greater need, and the stormwater fee was able to provide that sustainable funding source. Also of note, on the capital improvement program, although I list $3 million in fiscal year, I believe it was fiscal year 11, neither program 520 or 525 received any funding. So when relying on the general fund, it was very difficult to get the funds that would be needed. In our watershed implementation plan, we gave a great level of detail in what we were going to do. A lot of the projects were broken down by type, location, what the benefits would be in respect to nutrients and sediment reductions, what the estimated contracted cost would be, and which fiscal years you would start to see design or construction be started. And then in the MS4 annual reports that we issue and that are due every December, we give an update. So the white line is what we had in the original plan, and the green line is how are things going. It includes a status, it includes any changes. The biggest changes that we expect as we go further in design is to get some better detail of what the environmental benefits will be, but also we get a better, clearer picture of the cost. Sometimes, or more times than not, it does go up, but occasionally we will see some cost efficiencies that are going into play. Something to keep in mind with this, while the city is doing this, so are several other counties that, 9 other counties actually, that also have a Phase 1 MS4 permit on the same timeline that we are doing this. So, and we all have the 20% restoration. So all of the counties are doing more than they have ever done for stormwater. So we're gonna see some benefits in the long run. Also to note that the construction at times also has restrictions. We have moratoriums on stream work in the early spring, and that our planting season also can curtail things. So sometimes we want to match all of the various documents that we have, the budget documents, with the WIP, and this is to help you a little bit more. The WIP actually shows 78 projects, but some of those projects, like the ESD projects, is a bundle of 5 to 6 sites. So in essence, when all of the projects that are listed in the WIP are completed, you will see some type of BMP being installed at 260 locations. And those locations will be mapped using a mapping tool that we are working with the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance and the Green Pattern book to start mapping it and showing how the progress is going. Those 78 projects will be put out for bid in 33 different contracts. Those are going to be bundled in certain ways. And Art Shapiro with the Office of Engineering and Construction is responsible for that project delivery. The bundling is set so that some of them are large enough so that we can secure and feel certain about execution, but some of them will also be small enough so we can start to give an opportunity to local enterprises. And finally, when you're trying to compare it to the CIP budget, well, that's bundled even further. You'll notice that in 525, there's just one set that says stream restoration projects, and we haven't listed it all out because there are some variabilities, and we wanted to have that appropriation set right there. So that's just a way that you can start to see how the numbers all come together and where those references can be seen. So MDE in the past has required some financial reporting for our MS4 permit, and if you look back on the annual reports, you can see that information. With the passing of the state legislation, they started a biannual reporting for the Watershed Protection and Restoration Program, which is also known as the Stormwater Utility here in the city. That biannual reporting got changed to an annual reporting in the 2015 legislation period, and also the financial assurance plan was added. So these are 3 separate financial reports that we have to submit to MDE, and unfortunately, it is not comparing apples to apples. It's more like a fruit salad. The reports are round, you know, just like they're round, they have stems, they're a fruit, true, but they just have a little bit of overlapping. And so sometimes it's very difficult to lay all 3 reports out and say, I can match that number with that number, absolutely. The MS4 permit is very much focused on NPDES, on the permit conditions, and it's categorized that way regardless of the funding source. And it only has what we did last year and what we project to do next year. The Watershed Protection and Restoration Program is only focused on the stormwater utility funds, but it also includes non-permit activities, such as stormwater maintenance, utility infrastructure repairs, and the administration of the fee. Finally, the financial assurance plan is a result of the state legislation last year, and it's a mix of that where it's a 5-year projection with some checks, but it kind of teeter-totters between focusing on just the permit and focusing just on the impervious surface restoration. So it's makes it a little difficult with the comparison. I think the only thing that we have certain is that they are all mandated by MDE in a certain format and in a certain way. So this just gives you an idea of how we go about in developing this. This is the MS4 report that we look at and the operations. I showed you an earlier slide where we were showing the different operations and how that they are presented in the budget. And you can see that certain conditions are pretty easy for us to match up. Like street sweeping would just be under 661 activity 14. But other activities such as watershed assessment goes across other budget activities and also includes just a whole mixture with it. Then, if you want to compare that MS4 permit report with the watershed protection, those don't easily match up either. So this is just giving you some idea of the complexity of these different reports. Finally is the financial assurance plan report, and this is a new report that we've had to develop this year. The other MS4 jurisdictions will also be creating this report. How it's reported and the way that it's reported, we worked with MDE and they finalized the format in March. A copy of it is available in the handouts. We will also have that available on our website through the month of June. With that report, you have an executive summary, and then there are 6 tabs or 6 tables. The 5 tables at the back are actions that we're going to be meeting the impervious surface restoration, and those are grouped and categorized based on the type of the BMP. Then we're looking at the projected 5-year costs with some information of how is it going to be paid for. Is it pay-go? Is it debt service? And then we go into what the appropriations are, and we were using the appropriations that have come from the previous CIP budgets, and those are compared with the costs. Finally, you're looking at the fund sources, but those are for the entire permit. So if you remember the slide where I was showing you the restoration plans, and that's what's associated with the impervious surface restoration, that's just a part of all of the NPDES compliance. And finally, at the back end are the specific actions that we have completed thus far. So just a little bit about debt service. A lot of times we use this term, and it's an easy way to associate it is really looking at mortgage. On the right-hand side is a demonstration of how debt service can help when we're looking at decreasing what our revenue requirement is. For services 520 and 525, we have already had appropriations approved on the order of $34.5 million, but that is in combination with both permitted MS4 projects and some utility improvements. County transportation bonds were there to pay for the Ray Street project that was in your council district that had sat for almost 4 years because we did not have sufficient funding. In addition to that, we have already worked with the state of Maryland to get state revolving loans. In fiscal year 17, we'll have $583,000 that can go towards an ESD project, but in fiscal year 18, they have already put into their plan $20.7 million. We are also expecting to go to the bond market for revenue bonds in fiscal year 18. That is that's going to be enabled because we will have some revenue, excuse me, just one moment. We will have some reserved revenue that can be able to say that we're good for going for a bond. So this is one of the tables shown graphically, and you can see that the street sweeping will be about the same. We don't expect a lot of major increases in those operations, same with the inlet cleaning. But then, as we go into fiscal years 17 and 18, things really, really ramp up. A portion of it's going to be paid as pay-go. The rest will be taken care of debt service. But as soon as those payments go out for debt service, we've got to pay that off. And so I want you to pay attention to fiscal year 2020. That becomes one of your new baselines for your revenue requirements going on out, because we'll want to continue those services, and we're still going to have to pay off those debts. And the revenue bonds and the state revolving loan funds are a 30-year life on those bonds. So the financial assurance plan is due to MDE on July 1st. Within 14 days, they'll be posting our plan as well as the other plans from the other municipalities. In September, this will be presented to the governor, and then their assessment of whether or not we have sufficient funding will be issued by the end of September. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he is going to talk briefly about our stormwater billing as well as the revenue.
Good evening, Steve Kraus, Deputy Finance Director. I'm just going to talk about a couple of slides here on the billing. We issue quarterly, you all probably already aware of this, a consolidated bill. This bill includes water, wastewater, bay restoration fee, as well as a stormwater fee, and it's paid with one check. The bills are generated by the Department of Public Works, and it's collected by the Department of Finance. And as that money comes in, it is then allocated to those respective utilities when it is received. Oh, wrong way. Okay. Now, the question that often comes up is what happens if someone pays less than the full amount? If the full amount comes, then the full amount is accredited, and each account, each respective utility gets their fair share. If there is a payment that is less than what is due, it is allocated on a pro rata basis based on what amount was actually paid. And you can see here, it's based on the original portion of that respective utility or fund or fee. You can see here an example of $100. It was a $223 payment. It was $100 was only paid. That's obviously short, approximately $123. So the allocation would be $35 for water, $47 wastewater, restoration fee $3, and the stormwater fee $13. So each account is shorted by the amount based on the original percentage of the bill. Over the last 2 years, we're showing the collection history here. We thought that we would show first the storm fee billings in 14 and 15. You'll see it's $23 million in 14 and $28 million in 15. And what we're showing in the next column is the receipts from customers, and that is a cash number, essentially. So what we received in 2014 was $17.7 million of receipts from customers. Now, there's a little bit of a difference there between the fee and receipts from customers because the last bill comes at the end of the fiscal year and is typically paid the next year. So on a cash basis, it looks like we're a little short, but if you look like it's made up in 15 as it's increased to $28.3 million as it picks up that payment that was made in the last quarter. But you're always going to have that $5 million basic variance because that last quarter payment is always picked up in the next year. You can see how the cumulative bills and then the percentages are there. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ms. Groves.
He's much taller. So when we were passing the stormwater fee, I remember we spent a lot of time talking about credits and reductions. This is just a summary of where we're at right now. The table demonstrates, or the table includes both credits as well as reductions. The credits were developed so that if somebody is asking for a credit, they've done some type of service, they've implemented some type of practice that will decrease what our level of service requirements will be. But the reductions don't have that type of assistance on there. One of the questions that came up in the resolution was how many people have asked for participation credits. In our last annual report, we listed that there were 4,546 volunteers who participated in eligible events. And you'll notice that there's only been 41 who applied for the credit. We have realized that there's a little bit of a disconnect, and that is why our Stormwater Advisory Committee is looking at reviewing the regulations that we have related to that participation credit. So we're also looking at incentive programs. Incentives are listed over on the left. We received a grant earlier this year to develop standard design details for BMPs. This is not only to assist Arts Group and the Office of Engineering and Construction in decreasing both their design costs and the design schedule, but it's also to help our environmental partners and our developers. We've already seen in practice that standard design details are not only quick to cut, paste, put into the plans, but they're also quick to review. And that's what we're planning to submit that to MDE later this summer, and once approved, we'll be able to issue that and have that used. So we're looking at the fall for having that as a useful tool. I mentioned the mapping tool earlier. We're also revamping our website to have more guidance for developers as well as our environmental partners who are wanting to do these projects. Another thing that we're looking at is the city, when we're reporting how we're doing with what BMPs are installed and how much credit we may be getting, we have a hindrance because we wait until we receive the as-built documentation. And even though we have certain measures like a surety bond in there, everyone's not that quick to go ahead and get the as-builts done and be able to turn them around. Even a lot of the volunteer projects by the NGOs, the grants won't cover that as-built documentation portion of the design and the construction. So what we're working with, and when I say we, it's a collective working with other MS4 jurisdictions to work with MDE to find an alternative to having an engineer come out and certify that these are as-built, trying to decrease some of the paperwork but still give the assurance that the practices were installed correctly. Other things that we are looking at is a way to make the small restoration projects go even quicker through our review process. And then also, we do that through talking and collaborating with our NGOs, which we have set up a quarterly meeting with them on. Now, we have done a lot of effort with the stormwater fee, but I would like to have some more assistance. So we have put in appropriations for grants, but more to the point, we are hiring a grant procurement officer, and she is scheduled to start July 5th. This is not just to bring in grants for DPW, it is to bring grants in for helping with the city. So this will also, her role will also be working with a lot of our partners to make sure that the $88 million that we are putting in for capital improvement projects can be leveraged in some way. Every dollar invested into Baltimore City for environment is a win for us, in our opinion. We have also, starting 2 years ago, we have put at least $100,000 into city-funded grant program. It initially started with the Growing Green Initiative Design Competition. Wasn't just our $100,000. EPA kicked in $100,000, and the Office of Sustainability also kicked in $100,000. So that's another way where, by just having us have a little bit of money, we were able to match it further and get those dollars invested into the city. So finally, we're going to talk about the plans review and inspection section that is within my Office of the Compliance and Laboratories. Our office does not issue permits. Instead, we do the reviews according to the city codes so that we can support the permit processes for both DHCD and DOT with their right-of-way permitting. I want to also point out that we're a delegated authority from the state when we're doing this. That means we are open to audits, and we just got audited by MDE in this past year for both stormwater management and erosion sediment control. We did great. In many jurisdictions, a lot of the erosion sediment control is done by a state agency, the Soil Conservation District. So having that within our control and the fact that we have put it together with the wet utility is enabling us to help development try to go as smoothly as it can. Finally, looking at the process, though, we do the process by the way that the city code is written, and the city code was amended or was updated in 2010 related to this process based on the 2007 Stormwater Management Act. You have 3 phases. You have concept approval, site development plan approval, and final plan approval. In the concept phase, we do have this waiver. If somebody is asking for a waiver, it's a public notice. Those waivers also include redevelopment waivers on there. For both concept and site development plan, there's always at least one comment that's going to be coming out. During that time, depending on what the type of the development is, and when I say development, that's any construction project that is over 5,000 square feet of land disturbance or 100 cubic yards of land disturbance. One of the things that we have a difficulty, though, in trying to assess how things are going to work with our resources is that any time between the concept submittal and the approval or any of these parts, it could be a day or it could be 2 years before we hear from the applicant again. So sometimes they come around like a very vicious boomerang. So looking at the capacity, we track on a monthly basis how many projects we have by type. And this has been from our last monthly report that we have currently 152 projects in queue. That means there are 152 projects that we have received and that are going through the approval process. Out of that 152, though, there's about half of them are being expedited using a third-party expedited reviewer. This is an approved consultant, and when I say approved, that means MDE has approved them, and that they are able to do the expedited review. The applicant will directly contract with them, and sometimes that can cost them anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. As a comparison, if they were to go through our office, we would be charging them anywhere from $2,500 to $4,000, and that money would be going to the stormwater utility. So it's an addition. This expedited review process is an opportunity to get their permits faster, but it's a greater cost to the developer, and it's also a loss of revenue for the stormwater utility. In fiscal year 15, we received, and this is also in our report, we received 130 plans for concept approval, and we approved 94. So there's always that more coming in than going out. I think that's actually a good thing. That means development is happening, right? And on average, we're looking at about 13 new projects each month. When you're looking at these parts of these projects, the large projects tend to be large development, which means that it could be a new property that will be our tax revenue source, but it could also be a large project that DPW is having to do as a regulated project. An example would be the Back River Headworks project, or the reservoirs being tanked. The roadway and linear projects also are being done under a lot of the regulations. A lot of our consent decree projects are coming through and having that. So each of them have some right for prioritization. The number of staff has grown. In 2010, we really had only 3 reviewers. In 2014, we added a supervisor and another reviewer. In 2015, we consolidated, and I peeled off a couple of people from Arts Group, and we took the wet utility connections function, and we combined them so that instead of having 4 different engineers look at one set of development plans, you now have only 1. And in fiscal year 17, we're going to add 4 more, and I think it's going to be it for a while, and that should be able to get that. That is just the engineering staff for plans review. So during a discussion, Councilman, you had asked me, what does our time frame really look like? So the graphic on the right is helping to demonstrate that. The reality is when we're talking about plans review and going into the system and doing the approval, it's really only about half their time right now. A quarter of it is spent in developers meetings, doing some customer service. Any time that somebody's calling up to say, where's my project at? That's time spent on that instead of reviewing. On the other side of that clock, in that peach time, there's a lot of information that we need to report to MDE. It's not just about finances. And this past year that they have updated the requirements in a certain geo-reference database that is not perfect, and we are still working with MDE to kind of get some of the tweaks out of it. So at least 16% is taking at least 23% of our time is reviewing those as-builts, making sure that that accountability is in there, and then reporting it to MDE in some way. There were also questions about mitigation. So there's always this term of, does it go as a credit? And so when I'm going to use the term credit, that means that the effort could be used to go towards impervious surface restoration against our baseline. New development, a lot of times if they are just meeting the new development requirement, which means that you treat everything, all the new impervious area that you're adding, it's neutral. But if they're doing more than that, it can be a credit, and they have to treat at least 1 inch. For the quasi-redevelopment, which means that it meets the requirement for redevelopment as far as the amount of impervious area that they have, but they may have a little bit more impervious area added, then you could have, it follows almost something similar. All redevelopment, if they're meeting the requirement, it's a credit. And then restoration is all credit on there as well. And the redevelopment requirements are only a half an inch, while the new development is a full inch. From the fiscal year 15 annual report, we had 9 quantitative control waivers. Quantitative control is more about flood control versus the 29 qualitative control waivers that we had. A lot of the qualitative control waivers, though, were the utility work, and that falls within the requirements that's listed in the code. We also had 48 redevelopment waivers, and I want to point that out because that's a really great thing. What that means is that people are coming back to the city, and rather than taking up more green space, they're just doing something more with the existing gray space, and that's wonderful from an environmental perspective. We did issue 2 variances in fiscal year 15. One was for a temporary road at the landfill. The other one was for a driveway that the developer worked really hard with us, but at the end of the day, they just could not take care of it, and they paid a fine of $2,100. So far in fiscal year 16, we have also seen only 2 variances. For the fees in lieu revenue that we have collected last year in fiscal year 15, for quantitative control, that was only on the order of $49,000, and quality control waivers were $271,000. So if you've ever had a meeting with me, you know that I like to end on a high note, and that's the way I want to look ahead in what we're doing with plans review in fiscal year 2017. We have included accountability and performance tracking in outcome stat. We also include it in our internal stormwater stat meetings that we have on a monthly basis. I showed you that we're going to be increasing our staff. We've also taken a focus for customer service, not just towards the design engineer, but also to the owner. This is the person who has the money on the line, and sometimes there's that little miscommunication of what the design engineer is saying is the holdup on why they're not getting their permit. But this customer service is not just here's where your permit is at, but also here's your next step. You've installed your BMP, that's great. Send us the as-built so you can get a credit on your stormwater fee. It's every opportunity to have more education about why we're doing this. We're also working with both DHCD and DOT on the permit approval process to maybe streamline that a little bit more. We would love to see some way of the requirements for the public notices. I know there was a good intent when it was passed, but the direct mailing that we have for the linear projects means that we may be having 1 to 2 full-time employees spending anywhere from 8 to 20 hours stuffing envelopes. And I don't think that was the intent of what the project was, especially for a project that's a utility project. Online guidance is going to be one of our focuses, as well as those standard details, and trying to put more of what we have on the regulatory reporting and using the mapping tool that we have discussed with the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance through Urban Waters. And that is the end of the slideshow, so we're open for any questions.
Councilman Costello.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So can we just go in order of slides? Because that's how I took notes. Thanks. So slide number 12. So it seems that the general fund obligation for operations is just going to continue to remain stable as to what it was beforehand at about $11 million a year. And there's no.
It is, yeah, I'm sorry.
No plans to change that?
So at this time, no. What happens with street sweeping is that the stormwater initially when we went into fiscal year 14, street sweeping was supposed to fund the entire operation. Once the reductions and the final fee was agreed upon, we realized that may not have been feasible. So the agreement was that stormwater fee would only fund a portion of the street sweeping operations. And for the most part, that would be a 50-50 split. But I want to point out that the $3.3 million for street sweeping is not the norm. If you look at fiscal year 17, it's no longer $3.3 million for that operation. It is, oh, you want to go to 12? It is now closer to about $5 million per year. And that's also what we have listed on the financial assurance plan.
So is the difference coming out of the general fund, or is it coming from the fee?
So think about it, let me put it this way. The stormwater fee puts at least half of that operation to there, and the difference is paid by the general fund, yes.
Okay, so the general fund, in summary, the general fund obligation remains the same?
It's a little bit lower, yes. It's a little
Okay.
bit lower.
Are there any plans to, I know we've talked about this before, and Marcia and I and Director Chow have talked
great.
about this on several occasions. Are there any plans to install signage making moving vehicles mandatory for mechanical street sweeping? Sorry, Director Chow, I didn't mean to. Are there any plans to install signage to make moving vehicles mandatory so that the program is more effective for the mechanical street sweeping? Or has there been any more work done looking into that?
Yes. I mean, initially, we weren't installing signs because we were pushing for what we call the culture change, the people acceptance of moving the vehicles when the times. However, we do recognize there are some neighborhoods that will require signages, and we are working with DOT in terms of producing those signs, and we will get them installed. And it's a process we're going through right now.
Do we have any estimate on what it's going to cost to post the entire city?
Well, originally, when we bid it out, one sector using outside vendor to produce the sign, the bid came back extremely expensive. So that's why we decided to do it in-house using the DOT sign shop. So perhaps that will be a longer period of time, going in a slower rate, but we'll get it done. But clearly, it's going to be cheaper if we do using our internal resources in DOT.
Do we have a specific estimate from the sign shop?
No, we don't have that. I mean, that's something that we are still working through. I mean, obviously, we are trying to define. We don't really want to blanket the whole city with signs. I mean, there are some neighborhood require, some neighborhood are very responsive that we don't really need signages. So we're going to have to clearly define those delineation between those neighborhoods.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Slide 14. So at the top of that appears to be Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The 260 sites, that's all documented in the MS4.
The specific 260 are not in the MS4 WIP, and the annual report is the 78 WIP projects. Some of the projects for the environmental site design projects, or ESD, we are currently in the site selection point. Some of those will be located on city property. Some of those will be located within the right-of-way, and some of those may also go into vacant lots, which is part of that Growing Green initiative.
So is there a place where we could view kind of that more granular breakdown?
We will be getting, that's what we're trying to tie in with this urban waters mapping tool, so that you'll be able to see the location, what it is, and what the status of that project is.
Okay, so and you guys are working with the Baltimore
Neighborhood Indicators Alliance.
Okay.
And just a little point on that mapping tool, it's not just about stormwater, it's the other green patterns, so community managed open space, and also tree planting will be in there. And why we wanted to work with Binya is that we can also pull in some of the socioeconomic vital signs that they work on, so you can start to see how's this distribution working with some of the other things that we've looked at within the city.
Got it. Slide number 19. And I'm assuming the second line item under state revolving loans is missing a letter next to it, 20 points.
Yes, $1 million.
All right. And how much, do we have any information on how much is paid in interest on those?
What's that, 0.375. So the state revolving loan funds are, from a debt service mechanism, the state revolving loan funds is the best we could probably try to go with as far as the interest rate that we would get. Next would be your revenue bonds, because you get that 30-year life on it, but it has a higher interest rate. The county transportation bonds are only there for 15 years, so.
Okay, 0.38 of a million, right? Oh, the.
That's
Oh,
the
yeah, I
rate.
was asking, okay, for the total. Okay, I'll have to do the math. 20, so the MS4 permit expires at the end of 18, right?
Actually, it expires in the middle of fiscal year 19. So
Okay.
it's December of 2018.
Councilman Kraft, if you want to go, I got to look at my notes here.
So I'm not quite sure I understand the capital projects.
I'm sorry, the what?
The capital projects.
Okay.
Okay. So I understand, how we're putting money into trash cans and street sweeping and all of that. But I'm not quite sure how the money, how we're doing the capital projects in terms of how we're doing all of the replacement of the stormwater lines around the city. We have a lot of stormwater needs in terms of the thousands of miles of stormwater drains. And, what is the plan for that, and how does that get funded from this money? Or does that get funded from this money?
It does.
And how is that separate from the headwater, from the $450 million project? I think it's 450.
Oh,
That's a
well,
separate
yeah,
project.
That's wastewater. So the
Wastewater, I'm sorry.
stormwater utility would be paying for the stormwater infrastructure.
You gotta stay
I'm
from-
doing it again.
Okay.
It would be paying for the stormwater infrastructure.
You can pull that down a little bit. Yeah,
Is that better?
yeah.
Okay. And as you recall, when we initially had the $18 per ERU, we were able to start really moving forward with some of the infrastructure. We have just about as much many miles of storm drain pipes as we do water mains or wastewater mains, and they're actually the biggest underneath the ground. They're the widest.
Right.
And as you saw from Monument Street, they have the possibility of having a lot of devastation. Unfortunately, when the agreed-upon fee went to $15 per ERU, a lot of what we were trying to do had to be pushed out because the priority has been these unfunded regulatory mandates first. But it doesn't mean that we're stopping in any way, shape, or form. And we do still have urgent needs contracts for addressing certain immediate needs, but we're still doing some projects for the storm drain. There's just not a long-term plan yet. We're still actually going through a lot of the assessments as well.
Well, and again, I'm just not quite, I understand what you're saying. Okay, so we just entered into this consent order with regard to water and sewer, regular water and sewer, right? And that's like, who knows how much that is. I mean, it's 1.4 billion or something like that, but it's billions of dollars to do all that, right? But it's my understanding that the cost to repair, replace, whatever, the stormwater lines is in the same area. I mean, we're talking over $1 billion to replace and repair those lines, and some of those lines are just as old as the water and sewer lines, right? So, what is the short-term and long-term plan to deal with that? I mean, if it's not going to be, if the fee isn't large enough, and
Okay.
I'm not advocating raising the fee, okay?
Sure.
At least I don't want to just come out of here and says, Kraft says rain more, or charge more for the rain. But if we're only going to get a limited amount from the stormwater fee, and we still have all this other that we have to do with regard to stormwater, I mean, are we going to end up in a position somewhere where MDE, EPA, or somebody is going to come in and give us, another consent order to fix all those lines, and then we're going to have, an increase imposed on us, whether it would be on the stormwater fee or whatever, and every year we're going to have a mandatory increase plugged in, and whoever's here, whether it's the council members and the mayor, is going to be sitting saying, wait a minute, we don't have any control over that. That's not in our budget. That's under a consent decree. So the next thing you know is every year you've got the stormwater fee going up 9%, 12%, or whatever in order to solve that problem.
Okay, so let's talk about short-term and long-term a little bit. Start with short-term. I mean, as you know, the department has 3 what we call dedicated enterprise funds, one each for water, wastewater, and stormwater. And they are not to be commingled.
Right.
So that means we can't use the water dollar to use for wastewater or vice versa or for stormwater purposes. So the fact that, we, from a budgetary standpoint, before we had an enterprise fund for the stormwater where voted into a utility fund status, we heavily rely on general fund. And the fact that from the year-to-year basis, in terms of the funding was always uncertain. So that's part of the reason why we want to create a dedicated fund sources for stormwater purposes only. It's a very young fund. It's not like the water system or wastewater system where we had an enterprise system set up back in the 1970s. So what we need to do short term is looking at all the capital dollars. When we spend on the capital dollars short term, it's dollar for dollar, because we're taking the dollars actually paying for the projects. But at the same time, what we need to do from a financial perspective, need to build up what we call the cash reserve, right? We need to build up certain cash reserve. Therefore, then we can go to the bond council, bond market, and basically says, we have ability to pay back should we go to the bond market and borrow money. When we go to the market, that's the long-term strategy. So what we're doing short-term is we're not spending every dollar that we have collected for stormwater purposes. Some of the money go into that cash reserve to build it up. So one day, hopefully soon, we can go to the market and borrow money. Then it's no longer dollar for dollar, because we're borrowing a 30-year bond, for example. We'd be paying 10 cents on the dollar over 30 years. Then we can begin to ramp up capital projects because we're leveraging that buying power. We're not there right now. So right now, everything we collected, if one could say if we collect $22 million, all $22 million should be spent. That's very unwise. It will get exactly to what you were talking about, Councilman, that we no longer can go to the bond market. Some money had to be set aside, some portion needs to set aside to build up that reserve. So we do have short-term strategy with eyes on a long-term strategy to help us to get into that position that we can use bond dollars for our purposes.
Okay, so I'm looking at page 24, right? And so that says in 2014, we received 17.7 million from stormwater, right? Is that right?
That's correct.
So, okay, and then in 2015, we received, you can just lift it straight up, Steve. That's it. And then in 2015, we received 28.3 million for that. So, is there a formula that you have established as to what amount of that money you're going to put on the side to create this fund, so that the money that you're building up, you say you need to build up a certain amount of money? So you have like, okay, we're going to take 10% or 20%, or are you saying like, we're not going to spend, we have a base number, so like, let me use 2014. So in 2014, you say, we are not going to spend more than $13 million on these programs that we're doing, these base programs. And Okay. Okay. So,
Okay, so we need to get you, we can bring the information to you, but at least preliminary, what I'm hearing is that right now, we got about $11 million set aside as of FY15 or 2015 for the cash reserve buildup, but we need to validate that figure.
okay.
And we can
Yeah,
certainly come back to you.
what, okay, so that's an answer to the question of how much money's there right now. But my question is, when you have this money, you know, is there a baseline? Let's start there. So if you raise X dollars from the Stormwater Fund, say, pick a number, 13 million, and that's what you're budgeting for these short-term things to pay for these different programs, the trash cans, the street sweeping, the grates, whatever it is. This is what we're gonna do, and maybe we're gonna do 12 million in that, and then we're gonna have 3 million we can play around with. But we're not going over 15 million, and maybe we'll put in a variable each year of 2% or something for the coming year. But once we hit 15 million, whatever we get after that goes into the fund for the future, for lack of a better word, so that in 2015, that 28.3 million we received, 13 million of that would go into your fund for the future. So if you raised, in 16, if you raised 31 million, 16 million would go in that. So that, you're not, you have a plan, and it's not like, well, what do we have left over after we pay for everything else, and we're putting in that thing what we have left over. What we're doing is we're saying we're going to limit what we're going to spend so that we get this amount, because if we just keep it doing it the other way, it's going to take forever for us to build that fund up,
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I am in 100% agreement with you on the ideal condition. But as we know, on the annual basis, we have emergencies that occurs. And on the stormwater side, I mean, we just take Monument Street for as an example, someone that never anticipated it, which cost us $4 or $5 million to repair. I mean, so on the ideal condition, when everything is going as normal as we plan, I 100% agree with you. There should be a standard formula that we use. But what I'm trying to validate, which will come back to you, is that on the annual basis, we have a target, but based on the actual operation costs, unexpected costs, that has to come from somewhere because we have to pay the bill. But until that, until we build that reserve, so what I'm saying is that the time period, the sooner we go to the bond market, clearly is something that we wish for. But we recognize as such a young fund is being built up over time, but we are looking at more than 1,000 miles of aging infrastructure. There are going to be emergencies occurring.
And I agree, but if every time you have, every year there's going to be an emergency,
Right.
right?
But that's our dilemma.
Right. But if every year there's an emergency, you got to raid the fund, you never build the fund up.
No, we get it, and that's why, but if we go back in time to 1970, when the water fund was created, when the wastewater fund was created, when the fund first created, they all go through this period of time. They're struggling until they get the reserve up to a certain standard. So can I stand up here and guarantee says within 2 years we can get there, or 3 years we can get there? I think I'll be responsible if I make such a guarantee. But we know from an operational perspective, the sooner we can get there, the better off we, from a city perspective, we're going to be. So we're going to do everything possible to preserve, reserve all the funding sources that we can, so we can get to that state.
Okay, and I don't want to argue with you because we do have other people here, but in the 70s, in the 80s, We didn't have the EPA, MDE up our, whatever, making
Yeah.
sure that, and giving us unfunded mandates and everything else. And they're not going to get less stringent.
That's correct.
The demands are not going to be, easier from them.
Right.
So we're not going to have the period of time that we had in the past to build these funds up. And as we both know, a dollar doesn't go today
Quite
where
far.
it doesn't go today where
That's
it
right.
went,
Yep.
50 years ago. It doesn't, so there's got to be more to this plan
Yeah,
than
and there
than
is,
what-
we'll provide you that information. I mean, I just had to go back and look at the financial model that we have, and give a little bit more detail.
Councilman Costello.
Yeah, in addition to where the fund needs to go to, if we could get info on, what that formula is and kind of the thought process behind it, that would be helpful. Mr. Kraus, I see the picture of the water bill on slide 22, definitely familiar with that. I get one of those every 3 months. How is the late fee applied if a customer pays late?
I would ask maybe defer to DPW if they could explain that.
Like in this example. In this example, the late fee is about $11.
So the late fee is just like how the water, wastewater, the Bay Restoration Fund and stormwater in terms of the bill comes in.
All proportional.
It's all based on ratio, and I don't know if it's the same ratio as on page 23, but we can verify that.
Okay. And I assume there's some type of internal controls in place over at finance to ensure that partial payments and late fees and all that are applied.
Right. As Director Chow stated before, this is an enterprise fund or a utility, and it's totally segregated, separate from the city's other revenues, so we do account for it that way.
Okay.
So on page 25, looking at these revenue credits and reductions. So when I look at this, these are people who annually have applied for these? Is that what we're talking about here? So if I'm looking at vacant lot number or 22, so we have 22 people that applied for the credit?
Those are the people who have applied for and received the credit since we started the credit program, and that their credit is still active.
Okay. All right. Are we making an effort to let people know that these credits are available or these reductions are available, or is it mainly if they see that it's there?
Well, we do have, through our customer service, we do have that. We also have this posted on our website, and Mark Cameron, who is with our Watershed Planning and Partnerships group, he still continues to do outreach related to the credit program. Some of them are focused. Recently, he did one to religious organizations so that they understand what the credit program is and they can take advantage of it.
Okay. Well, let me use another example. So every homeowner, right, can get a credit if they plant a tree, right?
Right.
Okay. Or if they, take up concrete or what, there are lots of ways they can get it, right? So when and I should look at this myself, but I'll ask you the question. So when we send out like the annual water bill or something that has all this stuff, is there something in there that we can say, if you want to get a credit, or these are ways you can get a credit, visit this place or visit this website or whatever, if you want to get a credit, or, reduction in your stormwater fee?
That is an option, sure. And there's always ways that we can improve our communications, not only in that the credits are available, but why are the credits meaningful for the program? Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not that I'm necessarily want to give them the credit. It's when I want them to do the other things. I want them to plant the trees. I want them to take the concrete up. I want them to do those sorts of things.
We do.
So, you know, I'd rather see that happen than.
Right. And in that spirit, when, say, Tree Baltimore is doing a tree giveaway, DPW is tweeting about it, is using social media. So it's a cross-marketing for those types of efforts.
Okay. Councilman.
I want to talk for a minute about shovel-ready projects, things like installation of street trees, stormwater grates, children for Mr. and Mrs. Water Wheel, things like that we could be working on now. Is there some type of inventory of those projects that are ready to go? Some of the smaller things.
Well, some of the smaller things that we don't have a lot of them that are design, and the inlet screens are not a direct impervious surface restoration. You're going to get credit for it. What we install them for is to help the efficiency so that it goes towards trash reduction as well as the street sweeping and inlet cleaning. The efficiency will be increased because all the sediment and the trash is staying in the inlet instead of going down the pipe. We do have 2 stream restoration projects that are scheduled for advertisement for construction this summer or within this month, as well as 2 BMP projects that will be going in. A majority of our projects are part of the $6 million worth of design contracts that have been issued within the past year. And again, I'm just going to keep referring that the annual report has all those WIP projects and where they are at with the status.
So there's 4 total that are ready to go out, right? And you said the value of those is 60 million, or the value from the previous year? I'm sorry.
The $60 million is, I'm sorry, the $6 million, not 60 million. Let's be real. $6 million is designed for all of the projects that are listed as pending and that they'll be in design. Yes.
Thank you.
In terms of interagency, I know that you work a lot with Department of Recreation and Parks. Okay. But what is your relationship with the school system? Because I know that I've come across a number of people in the school system where schools have wanted to take up portions of parking lots, or where they've had like concrete yards, and they've gotten a lot of pushback from the school system. Even when the individual school's been able to find a grant or something like that, they've still gotten pushback from the school system. And it seems like they haven't gotten the message with regard to what we're trying to do here. So my question, I guess, is a 2-part. One, has anyone been talking with, particularly the school system? And 2, what is our relationship among our different agencies in trying and implementing these things, as well as our different sister branches of government, feds, state, whatever?
So let me start with your first question. I would say that our relationship with the schools is always improving. Sometimes it's just about finding the right person to talk with, and hopefully they'll be there the following quarter to talk with as well. One of the things that we recognize, and sometimes where the pushback comes in, is that it's not a matter of having access, but who's going to maintain it afterwards, and understanding that's going to be an additional cost. And with some of these practices, it's not just a matter of the money to maintain it, but having the skilled staff that know how to maintain a practice versus pushing a lawnmower. And so we are working with them on what those BMP needs will be. We're also working with them on the Inspire schools and understanding what a lot of these capital improvements are going to be, and trying to, even though they're state funded projects, and the state's really running that program, trying to say, take this opportunity to put as much environmental restoration projects in there as much as possible. And then we also just continue with them with the environmental initiatives, not just related to stormwater, but also with recycling. So that's always improvement. As far as with the other agencies, they get it, and they've all been briefed on what we were doing with the MS4. Some of the agencies, like Rec and Parks, can almost tell me some of the talking points better than I could. So they do understand it, and we're continually trying to work with it and trying to stretch all of our limited resources as far as possible so that we can get as far as we can.
I should have one last question. Do we have a forecast of total revenue collected over the life of the fee? What we expect through end of 2018?
Yes. I wanted to make sure with certainty as I'm looking at my fiscal person, yes.
Can you tell me what that number is?
The total number cumulative, or
Yeah.
we get back to you with the exact figure.
All right. Can
Okay.
you provide that to
We
the
have it, but I don't want to throw away.
All right.
I do want to point out, though, that the financial assurance plan that you have does show the revenue that's coming in from the fee, but that is only the portion that is going to NPDES. So the number that Pedro will be giving to you will be higher than that.
Okay.
Okay?
Right. Okay. Thank you. Sean Davis. You can pull that up, Sean.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Sean Davis. I am a principal with Morris Ritchie Associates. We are architects, engineers, and planners who do a lot of work here in the city and throughout our region. For full disclosure, I have worked with Ms. Grove and her team in...
May I interrupt you one time?
Please. You can interrupt me many times.
Kim and Marcia, I believe that some of these speakers are going to be posing questions or concerns with regard to you all. So we're not going to have a back and forth here, but if you guys could take those questions and concerns down and then provide responses to the committee, and then we can make sure that they get back to everyone.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you. For full disclosure, I have had the pleasure of working with Ms. Grove and her team during the development of the stormwater management regulations, dealing with the land development practices, and also during the development of the stormwater utility fee both are being talked about tonight. As you know, the presentation covered two distinct topics. I'm going to take the second one first. The second one deals with the stormwater management review and approval process that land development projects go through should they disturb more than 5,000 square feet or more than 100 cubic yards of earth moving. We work very, very closely with the Department of Public Works, with Rosanna LaPlante and her team. Of course, we have differences at time to time on the specific applications. We're always able to work them out, and quite frankly, in a very, very timely way. What has happened over the course of the last several years with the fee and the increase in staff is the Department of Public Works was doing more internal reviews, but as you see, with 130-something applications every year, their staff gets obviously pinched. And so when we go in and we talk with them about getting an expedited review, they work very closely with us. And the development community is more than willing to pay for that because of the time savings that are associated with it. And it works out very, very well. So I would applaud them in terms of the stormwater management review and approval process. Again, it's not perfect, but we're working, I think, day in and day out together to make it perfect. Now, in terms of the stormwater utility fee, I understand and appreciate and applaud, the purpose of the resolutions and why you're here today. There's money that's being collected. You want to make sure it's deployed into specific projects and improvements as quickly as possible. But quite frankly, based on what I heard tonight, it's amazing that we can get anything done with the reporting that we have to do to MDE and EPA. That being said, it seems like we are really on the cusp of letting several larger projects go, which I think are fantastic. The private sector community is going to be able to get involved and engaged in those and really provide their expertise in helping those bring those to fruition. But our collective goal is to deploy those resources as soon as possible. But I think our next goal really is to evaluate the progress of those improvements, to make sure that what we've got done, what we physically do in terms of stream restoration projects, is actually making a difference. Because what I'm concerned about is that, as you had mentioned, Councilman Kraft, MDE doesn't stop. The state legislature doesn't stop. Every January through April, something additional comes out. And these are mandates that, quite frankly, I think we're trying to catch up on. And so I think it's imperative that we make sure that what we're looking at and what we're doing is actually having tangible results to it. It's not just something that is being done in the best interest with no results that are associated with it. So I applaud you for having this hearing, for passing the resolution, for making sure that we're all staying on each other's toes, for making sure that we are able to deploy these resources as quickly possible and ideally get the private sector involved in the implementation. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Hallie Vandergang.
Good evening. Thank you, Councilman Costello and Chairman Kraft, for the opportunity to be here this evening. I'm Hallie Vandergang, and I'm the director of Blue Water Baltimore. We're an organization that's focused on the water quality health of Baltimore streams, but also neighborhoods and communities. We too were pleased to work with DPW through the implementation of the stormwater management regulations and the stormwater fee process. But it is important to note that the groundwork was laid as early as 2011 and 2012 for the creation of the program that the council originally approved, or actually put forward for approval in June 2013. So we are concerned that we are seeing projects really pushed out to, frankly, the end of 2018. We're an organization that does stormwater management implementation, and we know that things happen when projects need to go in the ground. Just like building a house or any construction activities, we're inevitably going to see projects move forward into 2019 and 2020. So the work of the resolutions were very supportive. It was great to hear information this evening about how DPW is restructuring to advance the goals of moving projects forward, and we're interested in keeping staff and other expenditures really dedicated to where the law was intended to be, which is to enhance restoration of our streets and our streams. While there certainly is need, and I appreciate your questions, Mr. Kraft, on the conveyance system, which is really how we're moving pipes and where some of these emergencies are coming from, that is not the intent of the stormwater utility legislation. That intent is to meet MS4 restoration and the 20% goals that Ms. Grove outlined. I think to the extent that we keep in mind what the intent of some of these funds were when they originally passed is important. Speaking for the environmental community that's here, we weren't really prepared to have necessarily a dialogue with DPW. A lot of us were just presented information as early as 4 hours ago in terms of the fiscal assurance plan and the PowerPoint. What we'd like to be able to do is have the opportunity to either come back together as a group or in a work group meeting and ask some additional questions of DPW, and I'm confident we can get there. So I just want to touch on the financing and the public information. With all due respect to DPW, a lot of these reports, as we've seen through the presentation, they're in the CIP, they're in the WIP, they're in the annual report. They're not necessarily in an easily digestible place for the general public. And I will tell you that a number of the stakeholders here have spent a lot of hours trying to dig through these presentations and come up with a clear and concise, simple tracking mechanism that can actually show where some of this is. We recognize the city needs to have its budget language and its categories, but really, for us to continue to sell this project to your constituents, to the voters, we need to easily and readily be able to point to what's happening on the ground, when's it going in, how much does it cost, and what's the benefits. And we're struggling to be able to continue to get that level of transparency. So lastly, what I would just like to say is there are other counties that actually have examples of how some of these programs are working more effectively, whether it's transparency, credits, or a grant program where more resources are being put into the ground faster. We recognize that better stormwater management is not only good for water quality. When we're able to manage and maintain stormwater, we're reducing these wet weather overflows that are really impacting people's basements, their homes, with having raw sewage enter not just their basements, but their bathtubs, their showers, and their sinks. The more we're doing to mitigate and manage stormwater now, the more we're really providing real relief to your constituents. So again, I thank you for the opportunity and moving forward.
Thank you. Elaine Lutz.
Good evening, Chairman Kraft, Councilman. Thank you very much for introducing these resolutions. As was mentioned, we think transparency is of the utmost importance, not only to manage the money wisely, but then also to continue the public support and to build these partnerships and so on and so forth. I appreciate the questions about the putting away some of the cash for supporting bonds later. I just want to be sure that everyone understands that when the stormwater law was implemented in 2012 and then amended in 2015, the new revenue created by the stormwater fee was supposed to be in addition to any funds that were existing before, which looks like maybe $14 million a year. And I haven't had a chance to go through the financial assurance plan yet in any detail. I just received a copy. I think the city needs to work really hard to make sure that the investments that were being made previously are still being made, and then that would go a long way towards being able to build up that cash reserve to start bonding. I do work across the state. I have been watching the formulation of the financial assurance plans in every one of the 10 MS4 jurisdictions, and bonding has been far and away the most successful model. I'm pleased to see that that is planned, and I understand that you have to build that up. But then as far as the MS4 restoration plan goes, it does rely heavily on street sweeping, which, you know, I understand the limitations of the city are already built. There aren't a lot of land available to do restoration projects, but there is ample opportunity to engage a community and do private property restoration. And then also a huge portion of the city's impervious surface is in its own right of way. So when you're doing practices and evaluating the projects that are possible, the curb bump outs, the things like that I do see in the plan get you that permanent benefit, whereas street sweeping, you have to continue to make that investment year after year. And so I know that that's a function of the much larger planning process, but I urge you to keep some of those permanent, also community improvement benefits in mind as you consider where and how this money should be spent. I do assume that we're going to have some more comments once we can dive into the financial assurance plan as it was presented, and I forgot to identify myself. I'm Elaine Lutz, staff attorney at Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So we will be submitting some further comments and questions once we can digest some of the material we heard tonight. But really appreciate you looking into this. The transparency absolutely helps the public support, and we look forward to continuing to build that public support to get the communities engaged and involved. So thank you.
Thank you. Kimberly Brandt. I'm sorry, Anna Mudd, then Kim. I have a line here of what somebody gave me an order. I was just, go ahead.
Hey. Hi, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's actually Jennifer Kunze, and I'm the Maryland Program Organizer. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it.
Is that better?
Okay.
Okay. My name's Jennifer Kunze, and I'm the Maryland Program Organizer for Clean Water Action, speaking on our behalf instead of Anna Mudd tonight. We're an environmental organization with over 50,000 members in the state of Maryland, and I'm here tonight to urge the City Council to support Councilman Costello's stormwater utility resolutions on behalf of our more than 3,000 members who live here in Baltimore City. I think we're all familiar with the issues with polluted stormwater and not enough capacity to handle it within Baltimore, and these resolutions are crucial for Baltimore's environment and public health because they'll collect information on how the city is spending its stormwater management fee revenue in a way that's more digestible to the public, and investigate ways to move stormwater-related projects forward as quickly as possible. This is particularly important to me because over the past 4 years, I've worked with my church and several nonprofit organizations, including Blue Water Baltimore, to install several of the kinds of projects this revenue could be funding in our communities, including rain gardens, rain cisterns, and depavement projects. We first began planning for these projects in December 2013 after the stormwater management fee collection began, and will actually complete our last of many rain garden volunteer plantings next week. These projects took place on church grounds, community green spaces preserved in the Charm City Land Trust, and city-owned lots accessed through the Adopt a Lot program, and were chosen because they would not only provide benefits to the broader environment and our stormwater and the waterways within the city, but they would also address community concerns about local flooding and illegal dumping. And I think that this is someplace where the revenue collected by the stormwater fee could be really beneficial for Baltimore's communities. It could be going towards green infrastructure projects like these to benefit the neighborhoods where the fee is assessed by providing funding for community projects that reduce localized flooding, discourage illegal dumping, and provide relaxing and restoring green spaces for residents, which is very important and provides a lot of benefits to people's opinions about the stormwater remediation fee and other environmental issues. And so given these many benefits, it's very important that the use of these funds for projects in our communities continues as quickly as possible with transparency to show residents the benefits of where their money is being spent. And so on behalf of Clean Water Action and our Baltimore City membership, I respectfully ask the City Council to support these stormwater resolutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Kim. I just missed the line, Kim. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I almost hit the floor. Good evening. I'm Kimberly Brandt with 1,000 Friends of Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. So we are a smart growth advocacy organization, and we're based here in Baltimore, but we work throughout the state of Maryland. And in our work, we're out in the counties and we're trying to discourage the bad sprawl development in the counties. And the flip side of that is trying to encourage investment in Maryland cities and towns, especially Baltimore, because Baltimore is our home. So we are eager to see investment in green infrastructure in communities throughout the city for two reasons. One, we want all Baltimore neighborhoods to be great places to live, to be desirable places to live. And we think that that kind of investment is an important component of that. The second reason is because we have been defenders of the stormwater utility fee from the very beginning, and we will continue to defend the fee. But as we're doing that, it's really helpful, it would be really helpful, to have projects on the ground in the neighborhoods that we can point to and say, this is how this money is being spent. This is enhancing your quality of life. So it's important that we all contribute, it's important that we all do this. So we support the bills, and again, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Sean Jackson.
Good evening, honorable council members. My name is Sean Jackson. I live in the 1st District and Baltimore City resident. Also, I'm the water policy intern for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, an organization which represents 1,700 supporters in Baltimore and many more voters. On behalf of the Maryland LCV supporters and voters, and as a voter myself, I urge for greater transparency with the usage of our stormwater fees. Stormwater fees are a beautiful solution to our city's polluted runoff problem and can be used to make the harbor cleaner and safer. I've been collecting some of the best stormwater solutions success stories from all over Maryland in the past few months. Baltimore has interesting and innovative projects that have taken place, and the stormwater fees could be used to create similar projects that I'd like to thank the council for putting the issue at the forefront this evening. I've been very pleased that the council members are taking this seriously and giving it to the time it deserves in this public forum. The spirit behind these fees was not simply to pay for overhead costs. The fees' intent is more or less for shovel-in-the-ground solutions. The community deserves to know where the additional funds are going and that they're towards the solutions that they were promised with the initial law. Lack of transparency should be a problem that people should be concerned about. I would love to see Baltimore City overcome the obstacles that are keeping this information from the public and for real solutions to come from this funding. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Terry. Oh, so you don't want to talk? Well, I've never heard you say you don't want to talk.
If I may.
I would just, I support everything that I'm Terry Cummings, Director of the Baltimore Initiative for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And I support everything that the folks here have said. The one thing that I would reiterate is I'm fairly well educated about this stuff, but even I have a hard time understanding all of this. And for this to be out for the public, I think, and I would ask that it be boiled down such that the public can understand this stuff. And, as folks have said earlier, how much money has been collected, how much money has been spent, what the projects are on the ground, and what we can expect in the future, because Kim is absolutely right. We need to translate this back to the community so they see value in their tax dollars. If they don't see value in their tax dollars, they're going to go nuts, especially with the additional fees for the sewage system upgrades. The one thing about this whole construct that is very concerning to us as advocates, as protectors of the environment, is that the MS4 permit is based on retrofitting 20% of the impervious surface in the city. That's it. There's no water quality parameters. It's just about capital projects. And we hope that those capital projects and street sweeping and other activities lead to cleaner water. But there's no guarantee, there's no numbers, there's no nothing. So we have to be assured that these projects get done, they get done on time, they get done for a reasonable amount of money, so that we can be reasonably assured that we're going to have and we're going to see water quality improvements by the end of 2018.
Great.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, is there anyone else here who has not testified who would like to testify? Anybody else? All right. Councilman, you want to say anything before I say anything? Or else let me let you wrap it up since you're the thing. So let me say a couple things. First of all, I want to talk about simplifying things, because we were sort of just having a little chat here ourselves about some of the numbers on this, and I said to Councilman Costello, I wasn't going to start asking questions about these numbers, because if I started asking questions about the numbers, we'd be here all night, because I read some of these things and I don't know what the hell they mean, but we'll find out. So, we need to do that. But a couple of quick things, because I think they are important. One of them was like on the follow-up when you were talking about the schools and about doing the things and then having them maintain them. I mean, I see bump outs that were done in my neighborhood, and I live in Patterson Park, and people built bump outs, and all they are is trash pits. I mean, no one has done anything with them. They're just holes. Every once in a while, a car jumps up over top of them and has to have their axle fixed. I mean, these were beautiful when they did them, but no one has adopted them. So we really need to make certain that that happens, because as Terry was saying, and I forget who else said it, but you got to show where the dollars went. But if you show this is where your dollars went, and then somebody comes over and says, all that is a trash pit, then it doesn't convey the message we want to convey. The other thing, too, is, and this is about city agencies, we had a long conversation during the budget last week about vacants and the number of vacants that the city has, and and about demolition. And we have blocks around this city where we just have vacant after vacant after vacant. And, the city owns close to 11,000, and then who knows what we can, depending on who you talk to, there's 7,000 more, there's 13,000 more. I mean, who knows? But bottom line is this: we're paying a tremendous amount of money for public safety, police and fire, and particularly in those areas, because those vacants are there, and that's where the people hang out, cause trouble, they start fires, and everything else. You know, we take those vacants down, we can create a tremendous amount of green space in this city. And we can create green space that we can just, very frankly, have grass, or we can turn it into something better use of green space. So there's something that the city could act on, and maybe we can look past just thinking about demolition dollars and how do we clear it, but how do we find money to restore it, and maybe that's a different way to acquire demolition dollars so that we can look at, you know, restoring some of this land where these vacants are, and we can start turning some of that around, and it's another way to work with another agency. And then finally, we are not going to adjourn this committee on this resolution. We are going to take it further, and you want to talk about that? Now, I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Costello.
Sure. One of the things that Councilman Kraft and I talked about was forming a committee, Healthy Harbor 2 committee, including a rep from Department of Finance, from DPW, and leaving it to DPW to get involvement from the SWAC, housing, BCRP, BCPS, as well as Councilman Kraft and myself, some of our environmental partners, many of which are here today, and we came up with a draft list of folks to reach out to. And I'm sure Councilman Kraft or someone from his staff will be in touch. Blue Water Baltimore, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Clean Water Action, 1,000 Friends of Maryland, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, Urban Land Institute, Sierra Club, Parks and People, et cetera. And that might be a good way to communicate all this information back and forth. I know some of our environmental partners still have some outstanding questions. I know DPW has kindly agreed to get back to us with some of the questions that we asked that we don't have answers for, as well as some of our environmental partners' questions. And then maybe we can aggregate all that information and sit down at the table and talk about a course of action, both short-term, mid-range, and long-term. Second, I just want to say thank you to Rudy and your team, especially Marcia Collins. You guys continually are responsive to any of the concerns that I've raised, and I really appreciate it. You guys are truly, as I see it, a model for customer service within Baltimore City. And number three, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Councilman Kraft. You know, your efforts over the last decade in being a friend of the environment in Baltimore City, and being a champion for not only this issue, but dozens of other environmental related issues is truly appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman, very kind. So here's what we're going to do. One, we're not going to take this to second reader on the 13th. What we're going to do is we're going to recess this hearing, and we're going to let Public Works get back to us with the financial information we asked about, some responses to some of the issues that you all raised. And then what we're going to do is probably sometime in July, because we need to get through the budget, but sometime in July, we're going to convene these groups that Councilman Costello just talked about, and we're going to have a sort of just a roundtable discussion on this, and we're going to find some ways to help DPW put this out in a more simplistic way, and see if we can't help this move forward in a way that we can help them sell the plan better in the neighborhoods, and go from there. Okay, so I want to thank you all for all of this, and once again, I want to thank our environmental friends, and I want to thank Rudy and Kim and Marcia. Really appreciate it. Steve, appreciate it all very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand in recess. Thank you all for attending. Please look around your seats. Make sure you have all your stuff. Don't leave anything here. They'll lock it up. Come back, it may not be here again. All right, be safe. Thanks, sir.